I think it's safe to say that multiple weeks of hysterical shrieking about Hasan Piker has not produced the results that centrist Democrats hoped for, because a poll conducted by Emerson College found that Dr. Abdul El-Sayed is now tied for first place with Mallory McMorrow in Michigan's Senate race, which is huge because he was in third place in their January poll, and now he's gone all the way up to a tie for first place. Now, this is a huge jump, but with that being said, there is still more than a third of voters undecided, so there's obviously work to be done. But centrists thought that they would be able to blunt his momentum by attacking him for doing an event with Hasan Piker at the University of Michigan, and they tried really, really hard. Abdul El-Sayed's opponent, Mallory McMorrow, stupidly compared Hasan Piker to Nick Fuentes, and members of Congress like Brad Schneider called Piker an unapologetic anti-Semite. But it was obvious from the start that the disingenuous attacks on Hasan Piker were fueled mostly by concern over Abdul El-Sayed's momentum, more so than outrage about Hasan Piker. Just watch this short clip from the video that we did about this a couple of weeks ago, where I explained why I thought they were doing this for political reasons. All of these inexplicable attacks on Hasan came out of nowhere, so much so that it felt almost coordinated, and leftists quickly pieced together the real reason why this was happening. Blakely on Twitter speculated that Democrats and insiders must have gotten some polling that is good for Abdul El-Sayed because there's suddenly a smear campaign, and they were proven right just hours later, because sure enough, a new poll dropped that showed that Abdul El-Sayed jumped from third place to second place, surpassing Haley Stevens, who is the centrist darling and preferred candidate of genocide supporters. In other words, they probably got wind of the poll, panicked, and told everybody in their group chats to pounce on El-Sayed immediately because he's only going to get more popular if the biggest left-wing streamer goes out to stump for him. And now here we are, weeks later, with Abdul El-Sayed tied for first place and Hasan Piker's name recognition higher than ever. So, masterful gambit, centrist Democrats. You really crushed it with this particular objective. And to be clear, I think that El-Sayed is running a fantastic campaign, so he probably was still going to surge regardless. But I genuinely believe that the attacks on Hasan helped because it turned into this broader conversation about Israel, which forced Democrats to defend their position and defend their support for this terrorist genocidal apartheid state, which is something that their own base does not approve of. So their own attacks backfired, blew up in their faces, and forced them to be the ones to play defense. And at the same time that they were forced to explain their support for Israel, they were also confronted about the hypocritical double standards, and it just did not go well for them, to put it mildly. Case in point, look at how Alyssa Slopkin reacted when she was confronted about her hypocrisy.
I talked with Hasan Piker this week, and he essentially said that there was a double standard on you going on Bill Maher's show versus his Twitch stream. Do you want to respond to that?
Well, first of all, I've never been invited on his stuff, and I've gone on Bill Maher a bunch of times. Look, I have said repeatedly, like, I gotta call balls and strikes, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, coming from the state that I come from. And so that's what I've tried to do as he's come into Michigan. And, I think there are a ton of podcasts or, invites that I've not taken. And every politician has to make their choice. They have to make a decision about what they're going to go on. So I've been on Bill Maher, I think this is my fourth time. That's just how I feel, given some of the things that were said.
Right, and that's how we can tell that you're full of shit, because you claim that you wouldn't go on Hasan's stream due to bigotry, but yet you go on Bill Maher's show all the time, in spite of his overt Islamophobia. So you clearly don't care about bigoted comments, otherwise you would not be going on Bill Maher's show. And this is why the attacks backfired, because the base just doesn't agree with you, Alyssa. They're not as gullible as Republican voters who just gobble up whatever bullshit politicians shove down their throats. You actually have to make a compelling argument to convince them, and you failed to do that. But one by one, Democrat after Democrat who attacked Hasan Piker had to come out and eat shit, and it was glorious to watch. Cory Booker was another Democrat who said that he wouldn't go on Hasan Piker's stream, and just look at how well he handled the backlash to that particular position when he was confronted about it on Pod Save America.
I had no idea who this person was until a few days ago. I never heard their name.
That's going around, I think, yeah.
And I still haven't heard him speak even. I haven't heard anything he's done. The man sitting over there is my comms director.
It's almost as if there's a bunch of focus on one random streamer, and it's not really the right way to have a big debate. Yeah.
That's my point. Like, so my comms director said to me, oh, you're getting asked this question, would you go on the show? And I'm like, well, who is this person? And all he did, the totality of this person he gave me.
Right there, that guy.
I don't want he's not on camera, so I don't feel like I'm implicating him. Mm-hmm. The totality of what he did to me was show me 4 or 5 of the most outrageous things.
And they're pretty outrageous.
They are. I said, okay, well, whoa.
Right.
Let's give whatever you saw officially coming out of my office. So here's a couple things. And I have this experience, I don't want to say daily. My wife experienced it last night in the airport as somebody was wanting to take a moment as I come off this very long flight and to scream at me. I always tell people, give me a Mother's Day card, please, because I get called you mother often. And it's from people on wings of both parties.
It'd really be a Father's Day card in that sense.
Well, but calling me a mother.
Well, you're not the mother.
Oh, you're right. I never thought about that analysis here.
I don't know what the fuck that was at the end there, but he very clearly thought that it would be less controversial to not go on Hasan's stream, but it was actually more controversial because Cory Booker is a motherfucker who was smiling from ear to ear in pictures taken with Yoav Galan and Netanyahu, actual war criminals wanted by the International Criminal Court for genocide and crimes against humanity. So it seems incredibly weird and arbitrary to draw the line at a Twitch streamer, right? Especially when the base that you need to win over in 2028 agrees with Hasan Piker. And that's why these attacks on Hasan backfired so spectacularly. A Data for Progress poll commissioned by Zateo and Dropsite News found that a plurality of Democratic Party voters at 40% either strongly or somewhat approve of El Sayed's campaign rally with Hasan Piker compared to 30% who somewhat or strongly disapprove. There's also 30% who simply don't know who he is, I'm assuming, but when they find out, they're probably going to approve because voters agree with Hasan on the substance. The same poll found that 62% of Democratic primary voters agree that candidates unwilling to stand up to AIPAC are less trustworthy on other issues. And Jewish voters agree as well. 66% of Jewish voters oppose AIPAC spending in Democratic primaries, and that number is 87% among Jewish Democratic voters in particular. That same poll found that 40% of Jewish voters across the political spectrum are less likely to support a candidate in a Democratic primary that's been endorsed by AIPAC. And the reason why AIPAC has become so politically toxic is because they're pressuring candidates to continue to fund Israel's genocide. So this is why the attacks on Hasan Piker blew up in their faces, because the Democratic Party's base agrees with Hasan Piker. And falsely claiming that he's anti-Semitic simply doesn't land anymore because Americans agree with his position. Not to mention, there's far more Christian Zionists than there are Jewish Zionists in America. So this idea that anti-Zionism is tantamount to anti-Semitism, it's just absurd. It's not hitting the way that it used to because the base now knows about the situation and the lies that politicians have told them for decades to justify Israel's oppressive system of apartheid, and politicians who've condoned that are exposing how full of shit they are on other issues pertaining to social justice. But like it or not, Democrats know that their support for Israel is no longer tenable, as evidenced by the fact that AIPAC Democrats have to go out of their way to hide their support. There's a reason why they're saying that they're endorsed by Elect Chicago Women, for example, as opposed to just AIPAC, because that is politically toxic. And another reason why I know they know that this position is no longer tenable is because a record number of Senate Democrats begrudgingly voted to cut off weapons to Israel, or I should say they voted to not send more weapons to Israel, which is a small but significant step. As Matt Sledge put it in an article for The Intercept, the dam broke because all but 7 Senate Democrats voted for Bernie Sanders' resolution to block the sale of bombs and bulldozers to Israel. The 7 who voted against it include Chuck Schumer, Richard Blumenthal, Chris Coons, Catherine Cortez Masto, John Fetterman, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Jackie Rosen. And on one hand, it's infuriating that these Democrats, including Chuck Schumer, who's supposed to be the fucking leader, are still openly defying their base in 2026 on this issue. And this vote should be the final nail in the coffins of their careers. But on the other hand, it's still remarkable to know that we've come so far, because this would be inconceivable just a couple of years ago. The fact that the overwhelming majority of Senate Democrats, including the likes of Cory Booker and Alyssa Slotkin, are voting to not send more bombs to Israel. It is a sign that the left has won, that moral people have won, because people like Cory Booker and Alyssa Slotkin, they have to do this because they want to run for president, and they know that they can't keep funding a genocidal state and be viable in the 2028 primaries. Now, that doesn't wash away the blood off of their hands since they voted again and again to send Israel weapons that they've used on children, but the fact that they feel like they have to vote in favor of Bernie Sanders' resolution is a sign of victory, and I think that we should celebrate that. And I think that it really speaks to why this Hasan Piker smear campaign backfired so badly, because when Democratic voters learn about what Hasan Piker is saying and what his actual positions are, they agree. But if he's persona non grata because he has anti-Israel positions, then they feel like they are too. It's like the Democratic Party's base is getting the middle finger from the people who are supposed to represent them. So in attacking Hasan, all that they did was make him more powerful, and they showed how out of touch they are, which is now forcing them to course correct if they even want a shot at being viable in the 2028 primaries. And we're seeing this dynamic play out across the country. In Nancy Pelosi's old district, Scott Wiener, the AIPAC-backed frontrunner, is running against Shoykat Chakrabarti, who was AOC's chief of staff, and Chakrabarti is surging right now, and he's just 5 points behind Wiener, not only because he's running a very progressive campaign, but because he's not mincing words when it comes to Israel.
Yesterday, Israel killed over 250 people in Lebanon, and they didn't just target military bases. They targeted the most densely populated residential neighborhoods. They did this right after we agreed to a ceasefire with Iran, and Lebanon was clearly in that ceasefire because Pakistan, who brokered that agreement, said so. Look, this administration has admitted that we are in this war because of Israel.
We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces.
And as soon as there's a chance for peace, Israel destroyed it by launching the largest attack to date on Lebanon. That's because Israel doesn't want this war to end, and they know that America's leaders are just going to blindly follow and keep sending American troops and tens of billions of dollars to keep funding this war. Israel is already committing genocide in Gaza, and now they're doing ethnic cleansing in Lebanon. So if it wasn't clear before, we need to sanction Israel, not fund them.
But while Chakrabarti is calling for sanctions, his opponent Scott Wiener is openly supporting funding defensive weapons for Israel. And even though Wiener has taken the no AIPAC pledge, he still received tens of thousands of dollars in individual contributions from large AIPAC donors, and he implied that it was anti-Semitic to question that because those are just his Jewish voters. So Scott Wiener is full of shit, and people know that he's full of shit, hence why they're calling him out. But still, he's forced to run away from his previous support for Israel because his opponent has raised the bar on this issue, and the base just isn't going to tolerate overt support for Israel in a deep blue district. Now, this is a bit of a side note, but as a gay man myself, it's a huge pet peeve of mine that there are so many gay leaders in the Democratic Party that have dick or butt in their names. Like there's Pete Buttigieg, butt, Scott Wiener, obviously. And I know that they can't help that, but at the rate that we're going, the first gay president is going to be Andrew McAssfuck or some shit. Like, I would give them a pass if they had better policies, but the fact that they're milquetoast and they have dick or butt in their names, that to me, it bothers me so much. I had to point that out. But putting that aside, the overall point that I'm trying to make is that we have won on this issue. Like, the battle is over, but the war, it's long from over. And I think that that is something that we have to step back and recognize and celebrate. But I don't think that it's simply enough for Democrats to adjust their position and move on. That's important, right? That's an important first step, but there needs to be an actual mea culpa. We need to see actual accountability for all of the gaslighting and attacks against the people who called them out for supporting a genocide. The Democrats like Josh Shapiro, who use state power to punish college protesters, need to be condemned by the party. Democrats need to acknowledge Joe Biden's culpability in the Palestinian genocide. All of these things have to be addressed before we can move on as a party because it's created real trust issues, right? It's created a legitimacy crisis, even more so than the Democratic Party already was experiencing. Because if you can support a country that's doing a genocide, you clearly can't be trusted on any other issue. You're not going to fight Republicans or stand up to the health insurance industry or tech giants if you won't even stand up against a fucking genocide. It's an open book moral test, and so many Democrats have failed. And even though I'm glad that slowly but surely they're having to at least try to placate us, there's still a long, long way to go. The DNC just rejected a resolution condemning AIPAC, and they avoided taking a stance on the terrorist state of Israel altogether, not to mention these are still the current leaders of the Democratic Party that have yet to be purged.
We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. We stand
So, suffice it to say, the party still has a very long way to go. And if they ever want to take back the country permanently, they have to do more than just be anti-Trump or anti-Republican and say, look at how bad they are. They actually have to listen to their fucking base once and for all. And the Hasan kerfuffle demonstrated just how much they loathe their own base. But having said that, I don't want to be too negative because we really have made progress here, which tells us that we were right to stand our ground. We're on the right track now. We'll never receive credit for that, but we don't do these things for credit. We don't advocate for human rights because we want to say that we're right in the future. We do it because that's the right thing to do. So step number 1 was winning the argument. We've done that. Step number 2 is going to be getting rid of all the Democrats who stand in the way of progress, which means we have to support candidates like Abdul El-Sayed and Shoykat Chakrabarti, who just aren't afraid to yank that Overton window to the left.